Nurse, scalpel. Vitals, stable 150 FPS, Doctor. Perfect, let's begin. Dr. Hansen, hold the power supply steady. Tweezers, remember it cannot come into contact with the case. Steady now. Steady. Oh god. Doctor, we're losing FPS. He's going to crash. Give me 10 cc's thermal paste right now. It's not working. 25 cc's thermal paste. 85 degrees. He can't survive at this temperature for much longer, Doctor. He needs 50 cc's of thermal paste, or he won't make it. Don't be ridiculous. No one this side of Milwaukee can apply that much thermal paste and post a PC, but I can. Who is that? Doctor, it's working. He's booting. Wait, who are you? Or me? They just call me The Verge.
Extremely bad, and it's full of things that you just shouldn't do when building a gaming PC.
I admit, I thought it was satire.
The worst PC build I have ever seen.
The extra and layer it on top of the CPU.
You are actually an idiot.
Holy crap, look, there's a missing screw on his all-in-one water cooler pump.
Don't listen to this person. This is really bad so far.
Presented by Capital One.
Oh, you gotta get your logo scraped off this thing. Holy moly.
If this computer posts, it'll be a freaking miracle.
When it comes to buying desktop PCs, though you can get the convenience of buying a pre-built computer, a big problem is you're then unable to show how superior you are to people who buy pre-built PCs. So you can forge one yourself with the convenience of spending 3 times your budget for the LGBT version of anything large enough to stick an LED diode onto. Nothing says gamer like spending $85 for a fan with 16 million color variations to leave it set to red for the next 2 years. But if you do want a high-powered personal computer, it is usually better value to build it yourself, just as our ancestors did. You have better control of the quality of the parts you use, can upgrade individual pieces more easily, and avoid bloaty adware that manufacturers forcefully install, like Windows 10. The only real downside is that you have to build it, but thanks to the ever-growing online PC building community, there's a wealth of knowledge from tech channels and the YouTube to get you ready to lose your buildginity. This is the story of one of the most infamous. The Verge are a tech news subsidiary of Vox Media. Normally they'd be found reviewing other people's products, a PC build being slightly out of their usual expertise. You see, going back a few years, PC building was reserved for men who had never felt the touch of a woman, a greasy nerd who would be scoffed at by the MacBook wielding, soy latte drinking, Verge reading tech enthusiast. But around 2018, jobs like video editing, programming, and even Twitch streaming were no longer reserved for people who use Velcro wallets in their 30s.
Oh yeah.
Suddenly, it was cool to build a PC, and The Verge assigned their best man for the job, Stéphane Etienne, a young cool tech journalist who's built a few PCs before. He's tasked with building the official Verge gaming battle station and documenting his expert technique as a tutorial for us less experienced builders. And on the 13th of September 2018, Stéphane and The Verge would release their magnum opus, The Verge's PC Building Guide. So how did that go? Initially, it wasn't that the elitist gaming community was looking to crucify The Verge or Stéphane for daring to step on their turf. In fact, many of the original commenters were happy to see a mainstream media channel cover what is a comparatively niche hobby and help introduce more to the absolute joy of the financial sinkhole that is enthusiast PC building. But as initial views rolled in, confusion began to grow. Those who were knowledgeable about PCs recognized that this was very, very bad, and there's no way The Verge, an expert tech media company, would post a tutorial this bad, right? So people would very quickly begin to let them know. And we'll get deeper into the reaction of the community soon, but first you need to understand what was wrong with the video. At the top we have the goofy moments, things that don't really affect the quality of the build, such as saying you need a table, recommending a Swiss Army knife that hopefully has a Phillips head screwdriver rather than an actual screwdriver, and referring to zip ties as tweezers. Stéphane was clearly a bit nervous and a little bit over his head. In his defense, I don't think most people realize how hard it is to do something at the same time you're talking aloud, especially when that task isn't one you're very familiar with, something Stéphane was clearly suffering from. One of the most infamous examples is how he warns us not to allow the power supply to come into contact with any other part of the metal case, or else it could short circuit.
And make sure that you align it with these little insulating pads so so the power supply doesn't short circuit and come into contact with the rest of the system.
This is just not scientifically accurate. But I think in the moment Stefan made a connection in his head between power and danger and just ran with it. Power seemed to have been a continued confusion for him throughout the video. Even more infamously, he recommended using an anti-static wristband. I personally have never worn one, but if you're the type of person who buys extra thick condoms, you can attach this band to your arm and then connect the attached wire to anything that is already grounded. An easy way to do this is plug your power supply into an outlet, switched off obviously, and then clip the crocodile to one of the power supply's screws. Stefan confusingly appears to wear what is an elastic wristband with no attached wire, which prompted what I personally think is one of the greatest reactions anyone made to the Verge build.
Hold on. He doesn't even connect it to the ground. How the... What? It's not a wireless wristband, that's a Rivstrong bracelet. He not fighting static, he fighting cancer.
A few issues start to become less forgivable for a tutorial video because although they don't directly cause damage, they're just not good practice. For example, most motherboards take up to 4 RAM sticks for memory. You don't obviously have to use all 4, but if you're using 1 or 2, there's usually a manufacturer recommendation of which slots to use as a priority. Stefan plugs his RAM into the wrong slots. His motherboard won't like this because he loses access to dual channel memory. If you are following a competent guide, this is something that would be mentioned. Check where the RAM goes first, and they'd also probably mention not to try and put the RAM in backwards because it won't click. The Verge's editor conveniently cutting away right at that moment. One of the most delicate parts of your whole computer build is the connection between the CPU and motherboard. It's generally best you don't want to poke and bend all these little delicate pins. For shipping, a plastic cover is installed. It's a really clever device that a lot of novice people don't realize. You never have to remove the cover, you just pop your CPU in, close the latch, and the plastic cover pops out. It reduces the amount of contact your grubby little gamer hands have to make on the delicate areas of the motherboard. But Stefan removes this cover and advises us to throw it away. It's not good advice because if you damage your motherboard and have to pretend it came like that to get an RMA, you need to replace the plastic cover over the CPU port for shipping, otherwise the warranty would be voided. But if you're a novice builder who followed this guide, Stefan has just potentially made a problem for you that wouldn't have existed without his advice in the first place, and these are the kind of things that need to be called out by the community. They weren't done so as a personal attack against Stefan. When you build your first computer, you will make innumerable mistakes that cause you extra time, and that's the fun of learning the skill. Beginners don't need to be chastised for beginner mistakes. Had the cable management been done by a flock of migratory geese, I'd say, good job, that looks like a pretty nice little nest. But it's the fact that this is a self-professed expert guide by The Verge, which means the fact that the case looks like it was assembled by wild birds needs to be called out. And many of the mistakes aren't so endearing. We're diving down into less goofy and more genuinely concerning recommendations that could kill your PC, or at the very least have some long-term problems. Going back to the power supply, they get hot after running for a long time, and the case that Stefan chose has a circular cutout in the case wall that is suspiciously the same size and shape as an aforementioned power supply fan. Perhaps you'd think that this is just a viewing window to look at the solid backplate of your power supply, and I think Stefan also thought the same, as he mounted his power supply backwards, effectively choking the PSU and rendering its fan a lot less effective at drawing cool air in. Another example is that if you have a water-cooled radiator for your CPU, you mount fans to the cooling block using particularly long screws. Stefan didn't realize that these long screws were meant to pass through the fans first and try to screw them directly all the way into the radiator, which is actually genuinely surprising didn't cause a leak. He was probably a bit lucky in this regard because if he had punctured a radiator fin, he would have ended up with quite a lot of his computer water cooled. But perhaps this additional cooling would have been beneficial to help offset the fact he didn't actually remember to use all 4 screws to attach his cooler fully to the CPU. Now, this final mistake I saved for the very end. It's arguably not that dangerous, but it became one of the most memed. Between the CPU's integrated heat spreader and your cooler, there are microscopic imperfections that lead to air gaps. To fill these, thermal paste is used. used. A pea-sized amount, all that's needed, and then you are done. Stefan's cooler already had that pea-sized amount pre-applied, but that wasn't enough for him. If we're saying Stefan was liberal in his application, perhaps Karl Marx would be the yardstick of how far left we're talking here, which led to some of the best memes of the whole fiasco. There are hundreds of mistakes that I've had to cut out the video to make it not excessively long and not that interesting, but feel free to check out my full Vergeberg for a near complete list with explanations. You can comment your favourite or what you think is worse below. Very quickly, tech YouTubers started posting reactions, and in this initial wave of attention, The Verge quickly disabled likes and comments entirely. Stefan also immediately went on the offensive and stood behind his work.
I made a PC video and some very angry nerds are very angry with how I built the computer, but it still works.
Oh, so you're just getting hated on because they're like, oh, well, if you would have plugged it in here, it would have saved some,
That's exactly what they're doing. Everything that they mentioned was corrected after the fact as well, but like, it's not my first computer and, you know, it still fucking works. It's a better computer than probably what most of them have.
Some people in the comments were genuinely hateful towards him and crossed the line from being warranted critique into disingenuous and quite vitriolic. However, the mistake The Verge made was by disabling comments, they stifled an outlet for the genuine and deserved criticism on YouTube, meaning that in order to express any opinion on the video, users were then sent directly to Stefan's Twitter handle as it was included in the top corner. Because he wasn't trained or advised on how to handle this, he effectively had to fend off attacks on Twitter and his stream alone. Effectively, The Verge martyred this poor man. By this point, many of the large tech channels had voraciously ripped the video apart. Once The Verge took down their video, 4 days after posting, the editor-in-chief tweeted a statement that the video was pulled due to some minor factual errors. Let's say that's putting it lightly. The apology felt largely insincere because The Verge addressed only that contingent of the response that were trolling, the hateful and racist speech. From the perspective of The Verge, the actions of the trolls meant there was no need for a genuine apology, so Stefan was left high and dry to deal personally with the full weight of the community's anger. With no one else to take accountability, he was clearly under a lot of stress, lashing out on social media, which only helped justify more attacks against him personally. And the YouTubers weren't blind to this. Linus Tech Tips actually offered to speak to The Verge and even do a correct build together, but The Verge completely ignored any of the olive branches laid out. But like anything, the community was eventually more or less ready to move on and give it a rest. That was until the Verge Pyre strikes back. The Verge chief editor Nilay Patel was stewing one day in his office. How could these lowly, sweaty little YouTube nerds insult The Verge? So after 4 months, Vox Media copyright striked 2 of the most popular reaction videos by Bitwit and Review Tech USA. The backlash against this was so strong that the decision was retracted within 24 hours, and a statement was offered by the editor-in-chief, which I originally drafted as an apology, then reread it and realised there is neither an apology nor any admittance of a mistake or guilt on The Verge's part. Patel first opened his statement saying that the situation had gotten pretty toxic and could have been avoided if the parties had simply reached out to him directly, which I find pretty rich considering how The Verge's legal team chose to publicly strike down 2 videos from YouTube. Patel describes how YouTube asked for The Verge's legal team's case and then agreed that the videos were not fair use and issued the strikes. In Patel's version of the story, he says YouTube asked The Verge's legal team's case and then agreed that the videos were not fair use and issued the strikes. Now, Patel has said this in what I would personally consider to be a pretty disingenuous misdirection of how YouTube's DMCA policies actually work. If you're a large corporation on YouTube, you can generally copyright strike anything and do so without the negative repercussion of abusing the system. I think YouTube agreeing with The Verge's case is much more likely to be that YouTube did what it only ever does in reviewing cases involving DMCA complainers. If you get a false copyright strike as a YouTuber, you can ask for a review in which the complainer is simply asked, "Are you sure?" And then YouTube take their word for it at face value. What Patel is trying to do is pin the responsibility on YouTube for a DMCA strike he initiated, which I think is pretty cowardly. In his retraction, he mentions he fully agrees with the Vox's legal team that these videos were not fair use. I personally don't believe this to be a truthful statement, argument, I think Patel ordered the takedowns and was then told by legal that his attempt to further censor criticism of The Verge is absolutely out of line. But regardless of what Vox or he believe, I will explain why I don't think their argument stands up in court. Firstly, let's take a look at his argument. Those two reaction videos used 90% of our footage without any edits, cuts, or otherwise transformative use. Now, this is a blatant lie. Firstly, we know from US case law in the H3H3 and Hoss case that when Hoss attempted to copyright strike a reaction video made against him, that the judges ruled in Klein's favour, applying that the long-established convention of criticism and commentary constitute fair use in reaction videos on sites like YouTube, though the percentage of footage used is not the key determinant for whether taking someone's footage is fair use or not. Because he brings it up, let's investigate further. I took Kyle's video and divided the video into footage exclusively owned by Kyle, footage of Kyle exclusively commenting over The Verge's video, and footage of Kyle watching the video without providing any commentary. As you can see, over 60% of the video is commentary and only around 40% is original footage. It's clearly not 90%. But anyway, we've already established that commentary and criticism of the manner in Kyle's video are sufficient to constitute fair use. For each clip included of the video, Kyle always makes a corresponding direct joke, comment, or criticism. The original video itself was over 10 minutes, but Kyle has cut it down to only 3 minutes and 15 of original footage to make time for him to make humorous reactions. If you know anything about copyright law, then you'll have heard the word transformative. Patel tries to suggest that because the clips aren't physically edited or altered, that they haven't been transformed. But this makes no legal sense because the transformative element is not the physical property of the video, but its marker value. The original video exists as a guide on building a computer. The reaction is transformative because it exists as a criticism of how bad that guide was. The H3H3 case I mentioned earlier is confirmation of that status. In summary, the statement that 90% of the footage had no transformative use is both factually and legally inaccurate. Patel also then makes a specific reference to Kyle's video that he felt the video contained a pretty racist character. Kyle, half Thai, presents the video as Lyle, who speaks in a stereotypical Asian accent. Being Asian descent himself wasn't enough for The Verge, so Patel decided this was also justification for a false DMCA strike. One of my favourite hard-hitting journalistic news websites has actually covered such a case before, so I'll be citing The Verge's own article from 2017 talking about how easy it was for Firewatch creator Camposanto to abuse DMCA law to prevent PewDiePie from streaming their game after taking offence from some of PewDiePie's jokes. I'll reserve my own opinion and instead quote The Verge that it's an unsettling move for anyone who's watched organisations twist intellectual property law to shut down political critique or lock out competition. It's funny that The Verge have also directly attacked other publications for doing the exact same thing, i.e. using DMCA to hide their poor journalistic practices and mistakes. Then followed a great period of silence. It wasn't until early 2021 that Stefan would return to YouTube. He actually reached out to Linus Tech Tips to come before the Council of Public Judgment and ask for forgiveness. Now that his employment with The Verge was thoroughly over, he was free to speak more openly about what went down behind the scenes. I've definitely roasted Stefan myself for what were a multitude of mistakes throughout the entire video, but what's more reprehensible was how no senior team members who worked on the project supervised the build and made sure it met any kind of journalistic standards. Those mistakes were also visible to the editors, production team and producers, which I know is the case because they had to hide a lot of the mistakes. I do still think Stefan himself should have done more research, but it's also The Verge's fault for severely restricting his time.
Maybe around 3 o'clock, they're like, you think we can finish up at 4 so we can head out early?
It takes even a professional builder quite a lot of time to put together a computer properly, and even then, mistakes happen frequently while you're trying to show it off for an audience. Stefan did mention that he wanted extra time to fix some of the problems in the first round of filming, but was told he had to just get the video out and move on. Fast food journalism. It does take courage for someone to come back to a place that ostracized and humiliated them, to own up to one's mistakes, take accountability and even fix what was done wrong. I've been following his Twitter over the years, and every post he did for much of the time was followed by kids making the same old tired jokes, but Stefan stayed really classy throughout the whole ordeal. He could have just done the same as Patel and The Verge, shut shut down his Twitter, but he kept posting and being a journalist, which I think takes a man of real stature and courage to do. That is what journalism is about. You also have to remember that very, very rarely does any one individual person go from being completely unknown to a viral meme overnight. If you go from zero to being on the trending page with several millions of views all about how badly you fucked up in one video, the sheer wave of hate is more than the human mind is capable of rationalizing, and that can really destroy you. So I have a lot of respect for Stefan that after weathering that big of a storm and coming out on top, he even came back to YouTube. The whole event is an interesting paradigm for the way big traditional media companies interact with and understand social media, and very often struggle to position themselves within the communities they make content for. I have to admit, it must be difficult for a faceless, bloated corporation to have the same genuineness and authenticity that an individual creator has. I think the way The Verge handled the ordeal shows a lack of understanding of the relationship between audiences and YouTubers. My advice to them would be to do 3 things. Firstly, stop making careless content. The funny thing is, Linus made a very valid comment back in 2018. He didn't understand why The Verge didn't just copy step by step a video made from an actual tech YouTuber.
Why didn't they just clone my video? Honestly speaking, why didn't they just rip it off shot for shot?
Right.
I wouldn't have even been mad, because it would have been a much better video.
Right.
It's the fact that The Verge were too lazy to even copy good work. It's like that no one even cared what they produced was remotely correct in the first place. A much better premise would have been to position Stefan as an amateur going on a journey that many of us in the PC building community have also gone on, rather than trying to seem like The Verge is an all-knowing god, that no lowly YouTuber could possibly be a better candidate for such information. With that positioning, you could talk about the mistakes you will undoubtedly make along the journey, help encourage others to work through them, and bring in the relatable perspective of a somewhat naive but enthusiastic first-time builder, nervously putting everything together. The Verge clearly learned this with their Building My First Mechanical Keyboard video, with John Porter explaining that though he'd never built a keyboard from scratch before, he was genuinely interested in doing it and was going to give it a go, which made the video feel much more authentic. Stefan could have been that person, and I think it was some lazy production to not pay attention to how to actually make this video work. And finally, I think a lot of the backlash would have been solved by The Verge just showing some genuine humility and collaborating with other YouTubers to fix the problem. What The Verge misunderstood is that, to many, these somewhat insignificant and trivial mistakes are very meaningful to people who are really passionate about technology. A lot of people do also cherish the experience of building your first computer. The expert guidance of the Bitwits, Linuses, and Jays does instill confidence, almost like your father first teaching you to drive a car. So when The Verge came in with a half-assed video and blatant abuse of copyright censorship, people were rightfully upset that they didn't do the community justice. I also think it's safe to say that, although Stefan didn't intend it, the amount of memes generated probably taught several million more people than if the tutorial had actually gone well. He's undoubtedly cemented himself a place in internet history, and his legacy will forever be remembered in the PC building community. And I hope Stefan can at least take some pleasure from being an icon of meme culture. And guess I won't be needing this anymore. Goodbye, Stefan.